Right, we're off. Good evening, Ollie Hicks, and I'm going to talk to you through some of the adventures I've been on over the last 5 or 6 years. This was how I started. I finished school and went on a British adventure, borrowed Mum's bike, found another bike, off we went, Land's End to John O'Groats, and that's where it all started. Straight after that, up to university, and not being the model student, perhaps, I set myself a challenge to do every year to try and keep myself out of trouble. So, like everyone else here, I went and did the Marathon des Sables across the desert, and the only difference was I took my shovel, my lucky spade, Stan, who came on numerous other adventures after this. The following year, I signed myself up to the Yukon River Quest, the longest canoe race down the Yukon in northern Canada, which runs from Whitehorse up to Dawson City, where the gold rush settlers used to go and stake their claims. But all these smaller sides were sort of building up to what I'd always wanted to do since I was 14, which was to row across the Atlantic. I found my inspiration from these two guys, Norwegian fishermen who'd settled in New York, and they took up a wager that they couldn't cross the Atlantic without using steam or canvas. So they had a fishing boat, that was it, off they went. All they had was tins of coffee, a barrel of biscuits, and a tarpaulin to sleep under. They, 1896, hold the record still of 55 days across the Atlantic. That is all they took. I think you find it makes us all look pretty stupid now with our satellite communications, our Gore-Tex, and whatever else we need to get across. This is a replica of their boat from just south of New York, and I decided, having found out about these guys, I was going to row the Atlantic too. So all I needed now was some money and a boat. Couldn't find any money, so went to the bank, got a loan, bought the boat, and suddenly, lastminute.com, after thousands of rejections, we managed to get Virgin on board as a small sponsor. So we cobbled everything together, learnt how to row. I'd never rowed before. I'd probably spent 24 hours in a boat before we set off across the Atlantic. My rowing seat was the wrong way round for the first 3 days, so it was quite a steep learning curve. That's one of the parts of the adventures I really enjoy, is sort of having all this equipment. God knows what to do with syringes, and suddenly you have to know, because you're on your own, you're self-sufficient. So I really enjoy that part of it. Whilst on the Atlantic, I decided I'm going to row around the world. This is quite good fun. So having successfully got across the Atlantic, I spent the next 2 years trying to put a campaign together to get around the world in a rowing boat. So here we were, 3 years down the line, in Tasmania, packing the boat with our support team there, the Hicks family, very poorly paid but very diligent, packing in 240 days of rations. Quite depressing knowing what you're going to be eating day in, day out for 240 days. Here is effectively 2.5 years of preparation boiled down into half an hour of departure. Looking quite pensive here, understandably, because I was aiming to be away for at least 7 months in the Southern Ocean. My route was from Tasmania across the South Pacific, and there's an old whaleman saying that below the 40s there is no law, and below the 50s there is no God. I was already in the 40s just coming out of the bay, and I was going to be in the 50s for the duration of the trip. So it was obviously quite a daunting prospect. Anyway, the boat was in place, we were all ready to go, and off we set. Fairly benign weather conditions as we left the bay, and this wasn't going to last. It was the Southern Ocean. This is the South Cape of Tasmania, and out we went. So mentally facing onto such an ambitious project as this, the only way I could deal with it was to break it down into manageable chunks. So we broke it down into, first goal was to get out of the bay safely, second goal was to get away from land, and then after that, well, the next thing was New Zealand, and then after that, break down the Pacific into mental sort of geographical legs. The enormous appeal of rowing for me is not the rowing. I don't like rowing. It's really not that. It's the ocean, it's the sea, it's the solitude. There's so many different elements. There's not many modes of transport that you go so slowly. Normally you go backwards, and you really become a part of your environment because you are 2 foot above the surface of the ocean. You're sitting outside in the elements day in, day out, so you're being burned by the sun, you're being soaked by squalls and gales. And the only way you're going to get anywhere is either if you're blown along by the wind or if you're actually putting in the time on the oars. And you're travelling slower than all of the wildlife. You're being overtaken by these sort of steamrollers of the sea, these sunfish, and you're being surrounded by the most incredible wildlife. You're party to the sort of most unique experiences. You see things that no one else will ever see, a bit like the guys in the Arctic will see ice formations that no one else will see because they'll be melted and gone. and there's usually a storm or a particularly flat, calm day. No one else will ever see that, so you are exploring in a way. And all these weird forms of wildlife, that's a bit of plankton, and the plankton you get at night, photoluminescent stuff under the boat, and not just little luminescence, but enormous, sort of look like disco lights under the boat, which you don't even see when you're sailing because you're going too fast. So going at a sort of average of half a knot was about right. And seeing this sort of thing, pulling out fish that's a devilfish, and after 4 months fishing across the Atlantic was the only one I caught. We're a bit more productive on the Tasman Sea, where to avoid boredom, because I think Sarah will agree there are large chunks of boredom, so I avoided that by fishing and took an enormous amount of books. I didn't go fast and light, I went very heavy, very slow, and I had a pretty good library. Part of the thing I find quite gloomy on all these trips is coming to the end, and it might sound odd having done 4 months at sea or whatever it is, but this was off the Atlantic, and I thought about rerouting to prolong my voyage at one point, because suddenly you've grown to enjoy the solitude and everything to do with the trip, and suddenly you're ripped away from your boat, which has been your life support system, and you're taken away. You've got to talk to these people. You've never seen people for 4 months. You can't form sentences. Everything's all quite tricky. You've got to eat with knives and forks. And then you are back to real life. The complexity of trying to earn a living, the sort of self-indulgence you've had of being away at sea, looking after yourself, is no longer. You've suddenly got to pay bills, answer the phone, and you have certain responsibilities. So back to work. And unfortunately, the trip around Antarctica or rowing around the world, depending how you look at it, didn't come off. We had to suspend the trip in New Zealand due to problems with the boat. So we're now looking at designing a new boat and trying again from Tasmania, hopefully in November next year, if we can find any cash. So thank you very much.